Hi, I'm John Hancock. I'm a lead program manager in the SQL Server Analysis Services team, and I'll be talking about Managed Self-Service BI. So let's start by taking a look at the kinds of BI applications and solutions you can build with SQL Server 2012. It really forms a spectrum. So on one hand, you have information workers in Excel using the tools that are available on the desktop, Power Pivot for Excel, to build personal BI solutions. So these are people who need to put together data from multiple sources, build sophisticated calculations, and put together great-looking reports right there on the desktop. And so many of the BI applications stop at that point. They can be really useful for a day or so, and the person moves on to the next problem. But some of them would really require more collaboration. So this is what we call team BI, where one individual, an analyst or a power user, builds a model using Excel and Power Pivot for Excel, and then publishes that up to SharePoint for their team members to use. So once it's up there in SharePoint, people can use the workbook that's being created. They can build great-looking presentations and data visualizations using Power View in SQL Server 2012, and they can really collaborate around that BI solution. For some BI solutions, though, they really start to have a major business impact. And at that point, you probably want some more support from IT. This is what we refer to as organizational BI or corporate BI, where IT gets involved and they may be managing servers, they may be building actual BI solutions with a data warehouse and ETL and BI models and reports as part of a full professional BI project. So in SQL Server 2012, that entire BI spectrum is covered by one BI semantic model. So this is the key innovation in SQL Server 2012 for the BI model, which is that whether you start in Excel using Power Pivot, move that up to SharePoint, collaborate in SharePoint, or make it into a full-blown BI solution, you're using exactly the same BI semantic model. The same client tools can access it. You have access to the same data sources. And we span the spectrum from the desktop through SharePoint and up to the larger corporate BI applications. So let me show you a demonstration of how this works in action. So for this demo, I'm an analyst in the healthcare industry, and I'm in my favorite tool for analysts, which is in Excel. So today I have one of my more normal crises, which is that I need to put together a report from multiple data sources and hit a deadline by tonight. So I have Excel open, I have the Power Pivot add-in installed, and what I'm going to do is open up the Power Pivot window. So here I have some data that I imported from my data warehouse. So this provides me with a lot of information on patient records and what the diagnoses are that they have. The challenge with it is that although it gives me a lot of information from IT, there's some information that I need to combine it with, which only I have. So I have an Access database on my desktop, which includes more information on the sales regions or the regions that I'm targeting across the country. So all I have in my data warehouse is state information, and I need to mash that up with data that I have in Access. So what I need to do is import from my Access database the tables that I need to combine. So what I'll do is just go ahead and pick the two tables and import those into my Power Pivot workbook. And once they're imported, I can actually combine those with the data that's in there already. So Power Pivot in Excel lets me mash up data from different places. It lets me create sophisticated calculations using the data analysis expressions or DAX calculation language, and then go ahead and build reports on top of that. So then now that I started building my model, let me switch to the Excel window and create some reports. So here I am in Excel. I'm creating a new worksheet. And what I'm going to look at is the diagnoses and whether they're getting better or worse since the year before. So I'm going to add a KPI to my pivot table and then start looking at that by different categories, such as the state name. So there I can see the states, and this came in from my state table. And what I'm going to use the data from my Access database for is to actually combine that and see how I can look at the trends across the different regions. So here I can see the Midwest broken out, the Northeast, and I can also go ahead and add a slicer that lets me drill into further details on that. I'll swap those over. So pretty quickly I've managed to pull together data from a couple of different data sources. I've put in some calculations that show trends over time, and I can start slicing and dicing this information. So for the moment, I've managed to solve my own problem. I've built a BI application that serves my needs. I can see the different regions that are out there. But in a lot of cases, that's not enough. At some point, I may need to share this information with the rest of my team. So what I need to do next is actually publish this workbook up to SharePoint. So I'm going to save this to SharePoint and put this in a gallery so that other members of my team can collaborate. So once I've saved that, let me switch over. I can see the same workbook has now been published up to SharePoint, and I can view that right in the browser. So as other team members come along, they don't have to download and use this workbook in Excel. Right here in the browser, they can actually slice and dice the data. As you can see, I can do all the kinds of actions in this workbook that I would do in Excel right here in the browser. Another major feature that we have as we've moved up to Team BI is that once I publish this workbook, I probably want the data to stay up to date. And instead of refreshing that manually every day and publishing it up, in Power Pivot for SharePoint, I can click on Manage Data Refresh and set up a schedule for this workbook to be refreshed. So here I have it enabled, and I'm going to set it up to refresh on a daily basis after business hours. I'm also going to select that I only refresh the data from the SQL Server data warehouse and not from my Access database, which is changing a lot less often. So now that I've built this workbook and published it and set up a refresh schedule, other team members can also start building their own reports against it. So in SQL Server 2012, we also have the ability to launch Power View on top of this Power Pivot workbook and do some ad hoc reporting and build some great-looking presentations. So what I'll do is I'll start with the diagnoses table again and look at the count of patients. And here I am in the browser in Power View, working against that same model. So I've got the diagnoses. Let me look at the patient ages, which I calculate in my model. And I'd like to see that as a column chart. So with a very few clicks, I'm already starting to be able to visualize the data and build presentations on top of the model that I've stored in SharePoint. So that's interesting. I can see the ages, and as the ages go up, the number of diagnoses increase. You see how that's broken out by gender. And with another click, I can add the dimension of males versus females in this data set. And finally, I'll add in something that I brought in from my Access database, which was the regions. So here you have it. With a few clicks, I can now see a really interesting visualization of how the diagnoses, how the number of patients in my regions are broken out. And I can save that back to SharePoint for everybody else to use. I'll just click on Save here. And I can go back. And right there in the gallery, the new Power View reports that everybody else in my team is creating are shown in the same place, in the same gallery, so we can start to collaborate further on building visualizations and reports on top of the model that I've published. So at this point, this is really self-service in action. I've used Excel on my desktop. I've pulled together data from different sources and published that up to SharePoint. I have other members of my team collaborating with me, building visualizations. I can set up a refresh schedule. So far, I've really built a pretty powerful BI solution entirely using the Office tools in Excel and SharePoint. So let me switch over to the IT view of this. So as IT, I'm managing the infrastructure that people are using here. I'm managing the SharePoint farm and the Power Pivot services within it. So in the central administration for SharePoint, I have access to this Power Pivot management dashboard. And if I click on that, what I can see is I can start to look at some of the information and start to see how the business is using the infrastructure that I'm managing for them. And we have a ton of information available on the activities that people are doing. So for example, I can look back in time here and see which are the most popular workbooks that teams are using in SharePoint. I can see a list down here on the right-hand side showing all these different workbooks that are getting quite a high usage, high number of users, quite a lot of queries. And there I can see that healthcare workbook that I published has 24 distinct users now, and it's really starting to get a lot of traction, a lot of use by the team. So as IT at this point, I may actually need to provide more support to the business for this particular BI application. So in SQL Server 2012, we really worked hard on making sure that the entire spectrum of BI applications is covered. So there are a couple of different things that I could provide to the business as IT. Let's say, for example, that what the business is looking for is more frequent updates of the data, more control over security and larger data volumes and things like that. So what I can do is I've got an analysis services server running here, and I'm using SQL Server Management Studio. And what I can do is actually go into the management experience and restore directly from a Power Pivot workbook. Just like I would do for a backup of an analysis services database, I can actually go and use a Power Pivot workbook on my desktop to restore as a database in the analysis services server. Let me just type the path for that. Healthcare. And go ahead and click on OK. And what it's going to do is actually take the Power Pivot workbook and create a full-blown analysis services database on the server for me. So here I can see it. And this database is indistinguishable from a database that would be built using the BI Development Studio by professionals, even though it's been built by an information worker in Excel. So I can see the database is hosted here. So I can now publish the location of this database and get people starting to use Excel against it and to use Power View against it. And it's the same model that I was building in Excel. So some of the additional things I can do as IT providing support here is I can set up security roles to access this. So as an example, let me set it up so that there's a West region role that has only read access to the database. I can go ahead and define, add members or groups to this role that control which users are members of it. And I can also define a row filter on the tables in that model. In my case, I'm going to actually filter the region table so that if you're a member of this role, you can only see the records where region name equals East. Okay, and click on OK. And now everybody who's part of that role will actually see only the data that I filtered there. So that's the first additional capability I can provide. The second is that because this is an analysis services database, I can script all of the activities in Management Studio. So I could do things like more regular refreshes of data, manage more closely the roles, and script adding members and things like that to it. Further, what I can do is actually set up partitions on the data. So as the data volumes grow, you might not want to refresh all of the data in a table at the same time. Maybe you only want to refresh the latest data that's come in. So my chart table is quite large. I can go and partition that so that instead of having one large partition with all the data, I can set up multiple partitions, let's say for the most recent month and then the history before that, so that I can optimize my refresh process. Okay, so there is one scenario where IT can take a model that's built by information workers, restore that to an analysis services server, and provide additional services to them like row-level security, partitioning, more frequent refreshes. Sometimes, though, for some of the BI applications that get built, at some point they need to transition to be a full-fledged corporate BI solution or organizational BI solution. And in that case, probably what IT will do is actually start a full project to take the prototype workbooks that the business has built and build them up into a full-fledged solution. So I'm in the Visual Studio 2010 shell here with SQL Server Data Tools installed, and I'll go ahead and create a new project. And now the options that it gives me in SQL Server 2012 are that I could create an analysis services multidimensional model, I could create a tabular model from scratch, or I can go ahead and import from an existing Power Pivot workbook. So let me click on OK here and select the workbook to import. And first I need to close that. Let me try that again. Okay, so what it's doing at this point is it's taking the model that I've built in Excel and creating the source code for it in a Visual Studio project. It's also opening the designer and bringing in the data that I already have cached in that workbook. As you can see, what's built in here is now a BI semantic model in the Visual Studio shell. I can use all of the tools in here to manage this model, to extend it, to add logic and clean up the data sources, such as pointing them to a data warehouse. And underneath the covers, this is XMLA source code. So I can check it into my project system. I can have a solution that has multiple projects, integration services, reporting services projects, all as part of that. So I've really gone from being a personal BI solution up through a team BI solution in SharePoint, and now I'm going to be able to take this over as a full-blown organizational BI solution with all of the tools that are available to professionals. So once I'm finished developing this model, I can go ahead and deploy that to a server, and at this point it will be a standard analysis services database. As you saw in the demo, we started out in Excel, building a personal BI solution. I could pull together data from multiple sources. I could build sophisticated calculations and build reports right there in Excel. I could take that workbook and publish it up to SharePoint and collaborate with my team. I could build, get them to build visualizations with me in Power View. I can set up Refresh to build a full-fledged team BI solution in SharePoint. And when I needed more support from IT, I could get IT to host that model for me on an analysis services server and do things like set up security, set up partitioning, more frequent refreshes. And if that BI solution needed to become a full-fledged corporate BI solution that could be imported into SQL Server data tools and made into, combined with an ETL project, a reporting project, and actually build a professional BI solution right there in Visual Studio. And underneath that is one stack, one BI semantic model that supports the same client tools, the same data sources and logic. Whether you're working in Excel as an information worker or in Visual Studio as a professional, we have one BI semantic model in SQL Server 2012. Thanks very much for watching my presentation. To learn more, please visit the Microsoft Virtual Academy. You can download the SQL Server 2012 trial software, and please participate in virtual launch activities. Thanks very much.